like to call this meeting of the Bellingham City Council's Public Works Public Safety Committee to order. We have one item before us today, and that's a report on the test of body-worn cameras by the Bellingham Police Department. Chief Cliff? Chief Cook? I'm sorry. Chief Cliff?
Thank you, Councilman.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring you up to date on the study that we conducted. If you'll recall, back late last year, I made the council aware that we intended to test body-worn cameras. We conducted a test from January the 1st through March 31st. It involved 6 officers from varying assignments, patrol, bikes, and the motor officer from the motor unit and traffic. During that 90-day period, there were 410 events recorded, resulting in 55 hours of video. We tested the TASER camera, and I'm trying to recollect the name that they used, the trademark name, the Flex. We chose that system because it offered more than its competitors did. Most of the competitors only provided at that time a fixed torso-worn camera. This system allows the camera to be positioned either on the frame of eyeglasses, on a motorcycle helmet, on the collar or epaulette of an officer's uniform. In addition, this system also offered us access to what is referred to as evidence.com, which is a cloud-based storage system offered by the company. It is restricted to law enforcement use only. That system does not allow other agencies or individuals to look at our video. Only our department personnel and certain prosecutorial staff from the city prosecutor's office or the county prosecutor's office is allowed access if the video provides evidence in a criminal case. One of the primary issues that drove this decision was the fact that 1,750 agencies across the United States are currently utilizing this system, 25 agencies in the state of Washington. Those agencies have reported a substantial reduction in use of force applications required by officers when individuals are aware that those interactions are being documented. The Bellingham Police Department, as a result of this test, has developed a policy for the use of body-worn cameras. This policy follows best practices from our industry and follows state laws governing consent as well as records retention. Part of our policy will require that the officers that utilize these cameras are mandated to use them in specific instances, and some of these would be examples of traffic stops, arrests, crimes in progress, and obviously interactions where individuals are displaying conduct that is aggressive or assaultive in nature. We have drafted a contract. That agreement has been signed with TASER. The contract is a 3-year contract. It involves the initial purchase of that equipment and the evidence.com storage that I mentioned to you. The total for that 3-year contract is $130,000. That is not coming from general fund revenues. That is coming from the public safety fund that is received by our department as part of the 1/10% tax that is levied. And at this point, I would like to offer council an opportunity to answer any questions, or for us to answer any questions that you may have about the system. I failed to mention at the outset that this is going to be implemented in a phased approach. Approximately half of our patrol officers will be utilizing these cameras, and we will phase the remainder in later. So, any questions?
Jack?
Well, I guess just in the terms of the phasing part of it, so are you anticipating then the cost will double?
No.
It will still be the same cost.
Yes.
It's just buying additional cameras for
Yes.
the
And
other officers.
the contract is for the initial purchase to cover that phase-in, but buys the equipment. We've also locked in the rate for the storage. Part of the controls on storage costs is how long you retain those videos. unless they have evidentiary value for a criminal case, or we need them to follow up on a citizen's complaint, we will only retain those videos for a period of 90 days, and they'll be destroyed.
Do you have a specific policy of when you actually inform somebody that you're recording?
Yes. Although in public places, it is not required, we will require officers to make verbal notification that they are being audio and video recorded in the testing period. We verified that through the tapes the officers had made. In private residences, we will ask for permission unless we are responding to a crime in progress. For instance, if we're responding to a domestic violence call and upon our arrival we actually observe as part of that call a criminal act occurring, we would record that. If we go into a home on a routine investigation and the individual says they do not want us doing so, we will ask, but if they refuse to allow that, we will not do it.
Michael?
What has been the reaction of people in the field to officers when, during this test phase, when they notice or announce that they'll be recording the incident with the camera?
Of the videos that I have reviewed, the response has been, oh, to okay. I had not seen or been advised that a person objected to it, particularly when it was in a public place or on a traffic stop. In fact, when our officers have been out wearing the devices, if you'll recollect, we had an article in the local paper about our plans to test these cameras. And many of the younger community residents would actually approach our officers and ask about them because they were very interested, they were intrigued. Frankly, a couple of them said that they thought it was pretty cool that we had that equipment. I think for the younger generation, they're accustomed to that kind of exposure to being video recorded through cell phones and other devices. So the reaction has not been what I would term as negative. And to my knowledge, the only questions we were asked is when someone didn't quite understand the advisory, they would ask, could you say that again, or what do you mean, and the officer would explain it. The resulting reaction of knowing that was we saw some very discernible differences in behavior. People tended to be much more civil towards our officers, tended to be less aggressive or argumentative, particularly on traffic stops.
Michael?
I guess I'm older than I like to think, and that I'm still kind of a little bit, wary of this sort of thing. So this is really a question for the administration. In a year or something, do you think it'd be appropriate to do some kind of review or report back on how it has gone?
Well, my commitment is to making sure that the council has the information they need to do oversight. So obviously, we would always like to give you the results of new policies that we put in place. And because I support this policy strongly, both for the citizens and the officers, there's no problem in bringing you back any kind of information that we've gathered over the course of the next year or so, especially if we are receiving any types of complaints we'd want you to know about. So no, that'd be fine.
Great.
Got a couple questions. Just kind of curious about the process of when cameras are turned on, when they're turned off. And you kind of touched on one of the questions I had about a DV call, if you would be recording that, because I know with DV calls, they can go crazy quick at times, and things can get volatile. At what point so it sounds like when they go out on an initial call, they're not recording, they're observing. When would you decide to turn a camera on, and what's the policies on turning them off?
Well, I think I can best explain that, Mr. Borneman, by describing how I would use it if I were an officer answering a domestic violence call. And this is based on information I received from other agencies. Some agencies, their officers, even though they were not required to, was the moment they received the radio call on a call that was of the type that required or mandated the officer to video and audio record, they would turn it on. So you might get the entire drive to that location, the officer walking up, and then you get the advisory at the door. Now, domestic violence situations obviously vary from one to the other. No two are exactly alike. Sometimes on your approach it may be very quiet. Whatever may have occurred is already over. In other cases, you may be walking up on a very audible, highly verbal, agitated argument, and you knock at the door. Someone answers the door, hopefully, or if, and I can go to that next, and when you meet with that person, you let them know, I want you to know I'm audio and video recording this contact. And if at that point the individual says no, and there is no visible crime being committed in the officer's presence, then the officer would shut it off. However, if on that same scenario and you were to approach the door and you got no answer, but you could hear a violent struggle occurring, we have an exception under the Fourth Amendment to make an entry on exigent circumstances. It's an emergency because we've been told we have a domestic going on, and we are, through our experience, know that the sounds we're hearing are demonstrative of a violent attack. At that point, we will probably continue to record because we know we have a crime occurring. I think the issue will be then, once it goes to trial, if there is a trial, whether a defense attorney would want to object to that video being admissible in court. If it was not admissible and the prosecutor advised us that we couldn't use it, it would probably be destroyed. Okay. So I think we have to look at this from a case-by-case basis with the understanding that the purpose here is not only in the interest of our officers' safety, but the safety of the community. During this test period, we had one criminal case where the video became integral to that case, and the individual that was on that video pled out to that charge and did not go to trial because he and his attorney knew we had a video of his behavior. Kind of a consequence of this, I guess you call it the CSI consequence that we've experienced over the last few years. When that technology is out there and people become aware of it, we will see more and more expectations from the courts and attorneys, both defense and prosecution, that we have that video evidence. And in fact, had two instances where the prosecutor's office called us and said, were these two officers involved in that test? Because I'd like to have that video if they were, and they were not.
So if there is an incident where there is struggle involved between an officer and someone during an arrest, I'm assuming that would be, the video will be going, and would you be the person who would review that tape?
Go ahead, Mike, if you'd like to.
Because I'm assuming any of those kind of situations would be a,
Well, currently, the sergeant will review the report, and they'll indicate it's a use of force, and then it'll come to either Lieutenant Beckley or myself, and we'll review it and make sure it falls within policy, within law, within their training, and we have some documentation that we complete for that, and then it goes up to the Deputy Chief, Flo Simon, or Deputy Chief Dahl, who then reviews it, and then eventually it goes to the chief, who actually reviews it again. And at any point, if there's an issue of training or procedure or something, then we get together and speak about what is that needs to be addressed or fixed.
Okay. So I can see where that's a good protection for officers from those complaints. Sometimes we got, they're abusive, they're doing this or that. If you got the tape, and so I would assume it would be reviewed. And
we review all uses of force, even if they don't involve what would technically be described an actual act of force. The mere pointing of a taser is documented as a use of force. So those, as Mike said, all of those reports eventually end up on my desk, and I review them subsequent to all the other reviewers in the chain of command. And if a question arises, it's brought to the attention of either the officer's supervisor, if they disagreed with the use, whether a lieutenant would say, I'm not quite sure this was appropriate. If we find it's appropriate and it's within policy, then our concern is, was it done according to our training? And so we look at it from multiple facets.
I can't imagine it happening with our police force, but I would assume if during the course of that kind of thing, all of a sudden the camera has been shut off, and you would notice in the review there would be those questions asked as to why that took place.
Right. And there's some, this is new technology,
Yeah.
obviously. There's a lot of difficulties associated with it. This system has a buffer so that when you actually turn it on, you're getting the preceding 30 seconds. But frankly, we haven't had it in the field broadly enough and long enough to really say what some of the difficulties might be. We did have some experience with our motor officer, obviously in our area. It rains during the winter, and he was utilizing it during the winter period, and we had some issues with the camera trying to fog up, and we called the manufacturer, and our belief was it was because the test camera we had was one that they had given to several other agencies before they gave to us. It was not brand new.
Okay. Got one more question, and I'll get to you, Mike. You mentioned the initial cost for equipment and stuff is $130,000. What is the anticipated ongoing cost of use of this?
I don't have the exact figure. I think it's approximately $25,000 a year for the evidence.com storage, the cloud-based storage.
Okay.
And we're going to keep that cost down, but those first 3 years we'll be able to evaluate whether that's sufficient storage. But I believe we've been advised that based on an agency our size with the number of cameras we would eventually deploy that it is. I think we've gotten a very good rate on the evidence.com storage. We couldn't even come close. I mean, this amount of money on an annual basis is probably 10% of what it would cost us to buy the servers and have staff on at IT to manage that system.
Okay. Michael, you had a...
Yeah, I did. One of the other claimed benefits of this kind of program is that it can also help protect the public, and that if the members of the public have concern about an officer's conduct, that there's a record that the public can appeal to. It's unfortunate, but a quick search of the internet will show a lot of videotapes of police officers, and to an outsider, it looks like a questionable use of force. And so that this could be protective of the public. But how would that work? How would a citizen, if they felt that there was an undue use of force, or there was an unlawful detention or something, how would they go about even knowing or retrieving or getting a copy so they could even look at it themselves? How would that work?
If a camera was being worn by the involved officer, because keeping in mind this initial year is going to be a phased approach, these videos are open to public record requests like any other document we create as a police department. So, and let me get a little more into detail about the process. When an officer's camera records an incident, the officer cannot alter, change that recording. They can review it so that they can put the information from that video into their report. Let's, for example, say if someone makes a threat, they can actually get the verbiage directly from the video and not have to rely just solely on memory. The other aspect is, once it's uploaded onto this service, any alterations have to be approved by certain individuals in the department, such as if there's people in the background that we don't want to reveal their identity, maybe it's a juvenile or a non-involved citizen. We would do that. That redaction would occur just like we would on a document that we were providing. And then we would download it to a disk, and that would be provided to the citizen, and they can review it.
Anything else?
Well, I guess not everyone knows how to make a public records request. Personally, I've never actually made one myself. I mean, I think I could probably figure it out. I suppose in the future, it might be nice, as part of our public information outreach somewhere on the website, there was a little FAQ on the body cameras, and it maybe just included a pointer to the public and how they might request them. I think that might be useful. I assume, by the way, will we have some kind of a public information thing on the website in the future about this practice?
We will. It's our intention. We are currently, we have a work group meeting to try to upgrade our web page, and we're going through that process now, but we can include this information. There is I believe there currently is a section on public record requests on our webpage as well as the city's webpage.
Yeah, one of the things, some citizens might not know how to do that, but I'm assuming anytime there's a concern about excessive force or whatever, the attorney for that person will more than know how to do that and will be asking to see those kinds of evidence. So that part, I can't imagine one that wouldn't.
Right, but I
Yeah.
don't think a citizen should have to hire an attorney. It'd be nice if we made it easier.
Sir, usually what happens now is a citizen will come in, and I've had a couple of these, and they question the use of force. Obviously, we don't have the cameras, but I could show them immediately what they want to see. When we take complaints, usually it'll go to a sergeant, sometimes it'll come directly to a lieutenant, depending on who it is. Usually on use of force things will come directly to a lieutenant. We'll look at the report, sit down, I'll take a written statement or audio statement from the person, what the issue is. Sometimes it's just a communication thing or a policy thing, but in your example, I'd have no problem, and I don't think anybody else would, is like, okay, here you are, here's the officers, trying to figure out what it is the issue is. Because we very seldom get complaints on excessive use of force, and when we do, we obviously look at them really closely, get everybody's statements, and then discuss it with, if I have a question, then we have use of force experts who train, I'll ask them, and look at policy. So does that kind of answer your question?
That'd be nice.
Jack? One more?
So out of the 410 events that the officers responded to during this trial period, were there any of them that you were really glad that you had the cameras that really, helped you with further investigation or helped abate any sort of problems during the trial period?
In fact, I was. The one case I did describe to you where the prosecutor found the video very helpful. It motivated the individual who we arrested to take a plea as opposed to going to trial, which for us that meant no testimony by the officer, no overtime involved in going to court, more time for the prosecutor's office to work on other cases. And then there were a couple of videos. Ben Horton, who's sitting behind me to my left, had a video of a foot pursuit, which is that very case, which I found very helpful because it gave me a perspective of what he had to do to make that arrest and the actual conduct that this individual was portraying that, to me, as even an officer that's been out of the field on a regular basis for quite some time, you can see what that individual is doing. There are certain behaviors that we interpret as law enforcement officers that are predictive of either flight, an assault, or this individual is trying to buy time to either decide what he's going to do or destroy evidence. And those issues were all evident in this one tape. So it was very helpful to me. I think there's some training benefits there. One in particular that I would have liked to have shown you today, but we were limited on time, was an interaction between our officers downtown. There were actually two, of an individual who's well known in the community, but he was highly intoxicated, very belligerent, quite acting out quite a bit, and the officers were trying to deal with him. And it went on for a good 20 minutes. What I saw in that video was not only some evidence of what you might not see on your daily trips downtown during the day, but what a lot of our citizens might observe in the evening. So that was beneficial from that respect. The other was, and I believe it was Ben again, was riding his bicycle downtown and made the corner into an alley where we have a common problem with people drinking in public, and it's in his view almost immediately. Here's a guy with a large beer in his hand drinking out in public. What more can I say? You don't need any more evidence than that. So, based on the limited number and hours of video, yes, I dare say that as time goes by, we're going to see more and more of that.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, well, this was for informational only. I want to thank you. It was a good report.
Thank you.
Yes, and I really hope this does continue to work to, reduce the applications of force and make it work for everyone better. Thank you, Chief. End of committee.